From an engineer to UX designer to user researcher, and now a mental wellness coach. Sridhar's journey has been a roller coaster ride. Only a wise and talented person can switch so effortlessly and excel in each field. Sridhar was one of the first people to guide me when I switched to user research. His perspective is not only helpful for a budding user researcher, but for anyone wanting to take their career to the next level. I am your host Sweekriti, and this is India's first user and UX research podcast, Core User to UX. Hi Sridhar, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. You are one of my first user research friends, so because I had doubts when I came in first into the field, and you gladly solved them. So thank you so much for being there. And now inviting you to my podcast, you're doing me a double favor.
Sure, hey Sweekriti, I'm so happy and glad to be here. It's always good, catching up with a friend.
Awesome. So let's directly get into the gist of our meeting and start to discuss what both of us love, that is user research.
Yeah.
And you were an engineer and then a designer, and then you finally became a researcher. So that has been a really interesting journey, although not unique. Yeah,
Thanks for
that
keeping me grounded.
anyway. So one thing that we have discussed about and that really caught my attention is that user research is a touch point with customers. Like you have sales, then you have customer support, but user research is a really different touch point, directly coming from the product side, right?
Hmm.
And the nature of the field is such that you can sense what is going wrong or what will go
Hmm.
wrong. It's like those people who were saying before 2008 crisis that okay, something is really wrong, but people were not listening to them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I would really want you to talk about that aspect, and it is
Hmm.
important coming from your mouth. I'll tell you why, because you have worked in startups,
Yeah, yeah,
which are like a very dynamic
yeah,
environment. Anything can happen at any
yeah.
day. So
Yes.
please tell your experience of being a user researcher and sensing if things are going wrong. Basically, sensing the
Yeah.
danger.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really interesting question, right? So, when it comes to interaction with the users, so there are many people in an organization who are in touch with the users, your customer support team, your sales team, be it product managers, designers, the researchers, everybody, a lot of people are in touch with the users. So we do not have complete monopoly over that. But what kind of sets user researchers apart from the other members is our ability to collate all those different data points to zoom out and see the big picture view of things, right? For instance, a customer support person might be able to, glean some insights, but, they might not have the full picture of what is going on in the product, what the product roadmap looks like, and things like that. So now, as a researcher, what I have done, or I've seen a lot of good researchers do, is to collaborate with people in the organization who are in constant contact with the users. See, like as a researcher, we have limited bandwidth, limited time, and there are only so many members in the team, right? How many calls can we take? But when we try to have a partnership and collaborate with other members, we'll be able to get much a wider variety of data and much more quality of insights. So, like user researchers, like you said, are kind of have like a sixth sense when it comes to sensing, what's out there. It's we are kind of like psychics in some sense, I could say. And like user research itself is a very ambiguous thing, right? Like sometimes, when you're working with the, especially with the startup, and if it's in an early stage or something, there is going to be so much of uncertainty. Is the product market fit there? If it is there, then how do we scale? And if we are scaling, how do we defend ourselves from the competition? And there is not one factor. There are multiple factors outside of your control which can, impact the success of the product. So as user researchers, we need to be aware of, all different points of views and be our own devil's advocate and, trying to tear down our analysis and things like that. And so, if I had to give an example of, from my own life where I sense something okay or not okay, like a couple of years back, I was working with, like a edtech startup, and like the COVID impact was there. In general, there was a big boom in the edtech sector. But then, once the second wave started receding and the schools started opening partially, we could sense, there was a shift in the usage patterns, right? And the students weren't using it that often. I was speaking with a lot of parents, and parents were actually concerned about their child being on the computer or on the phone all the time. Even though the child may have actually been using it for studying purposes, the parents, they're always concerned. There is also the concern of too much screen time, right? Even while it started first in, like, in a country like India, where you start noticing these patterns of, okay, now I want to go out, maybe go to school, go to tuition and things like that. And companies which did not pay heed to that early signals or the early warnings, they all suffered, and we saw a huge, like, a market correction which happened especially in the edtech sector. And the companies which actually paid heed to it and made some corrections, maybe if they went into a hybrid model or something to add more value to the customers, they were the ones who were able to, like, tide over that kind of a crisis. So yeah, in that sense, like, user researchers have that edge, I must say, over the other team members when it comes to sensing what's out there, both opportunity as well as pitfalls.
My primary takeaway was that VCs should start hiring user researchers.
Absolutely. Hey, we have entrepreneur in residence, we have designer in residence. Why not have a researcher in residence? We should have a role like that.
Yeah, because only this thing can make sense, or maybe talk to user researchers.
Yeah,
Because the way you're saying it, it seems very obvious, right? That
yeah,
if there's a shift in attitude and people are worried about their
mhm,
children spending time on computer,
yeah,
and everything starts from the mind, right?
yeah.
Then it finally manifested into the pitfall or the downfall of edtech that we saw.
Yeah, adding more features which do not deal with the actual pain points wouldn't have moved the needle in any way. Here, the clear thing is, like, I do not want my child to be in front of the computer. Then what else can you do? Just adding few buttons or gamification elements is going to make the cut.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I read a very interesting thing just before this call. There's
Mhm.
my favorite author, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he just
Yeah.
tweeted that, the messenger is always hated.
Yes.
So that means most of user researchers are going to be hated because we have to tell the truth.
Unfortunate reality, and I've also been on the receiving end of it at times, where sometimes you present these recommendations and things like that. The first thing is, oh, this is qualitative, there is not enough feedback, and we can't make a judgment call with it. I understand, but most of the times we don't take just like a few interviews samples and we make very broad insights or directions out of it. We try to substantiate it with some other quantitative insights, but at the same time, it's not like if your total user base is 5 million, you can't expect to speak to, like, I don't know, 1 million. There is a decent level of sample size should give you enough clarity and which direction to proceed in.
That absolutely makes sense because even I have been accused of my data being statistically insignificant.
Yes. That's the famous quote for all this thing, researchers. Sometimes I feel like I should make a poster and put it as my screensaver. My data is significant.
Yeah, affirmation, right?
Yes, my data is significant.
Right. But at the same time, that is why triangulation exists, right? We are not asking you to stop here. This is just the
Yes.
first step. Now you have been given a direction,
Yeah.
and now you have to explore that path on your own. And
Yes.
that is what people fail to understand, that this is just the compass that's showing you, okay,
Yeah.
which direction do we have to head in. It's
Yeah.
our duty again to treat that path and get a quantitative picture of the entire scenario.
Yeah. Another researcher gave a beautiful term for it. She called it thick data. I forgot who it was. So she's referred to qual data as thick data. It's got multiple layers. We talk about big data, which is all quant in nature, but qual is thick data. It's like an apples to orange. It's not an fair comparison.
Yeah, I guess thick data and big data can actually do wonders.
Yes.
Awesome. So another thing, Sridhar, I really wanted to talk about is that your background of working with startups really fascinates me. And I'll tell you why, because I have this image, or maybe it's true, I don't know, that startups are hesitant to hire user researchers.
Mm.
They're like, budget come hai, या फिर
Yes.
they have little budget to hire
Yeah.
and they want to just hire the high impact roles. I
Yeah.
don't think that how well do they see user research as a valuable asset to their company. And
Mm.
in this kind of environment, you have worked with startups.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what should one do when
Mm.
one joins a startup as a first user research hire?
Mm.
Like, what is that game like?
Yeah, another great question. So the thing is, startups do take some time to, make the first research hire, and to in a certain extent, they are justified in doing that, right? Like in the initial stages when there isn't enough clarity on how to proceed, a lot of people are already, it's like boots on the ground kind of an approach. The founders are, talking to users and maybe even the dev teams and things like this. So they are doing a little bit of research. It might not be like a very structured thing, but there is definitely some kind of data which is coming in. So because of which, they do not, want to go with the researcher in the very early stages, when they are still trying to figure out what should be the product itself. In those stages, hiring a full-time researcher might not even do justice to the researcher. Only in very few companies they can still be, like they can add immense value. But the thing is, unless the higher ups they understand how to utilize research in a 0 to 1 kind of a stage, in those scenarios, they could at least work with maybe like a contract researcher or somebody of that sort, so that they get some kind of feedback coming in, in the early stages and things like that. Now, coming to the question of now that okay, you are a researcher and you have been hired at a startup, like what do you do? So, when you're the first researcher at a company, it is both a boon as well as a bane. One, you have a clean slate, you can set things up as you wish. And the other thing is because there is no precedent, everything that you do will be questioned and you will be put under the microscope, right? So, what the way, and I have been the first researcher in startups, and I've set up the research teams as well. So I've gone through this grind. And one thing, it starts during the interview process itself, right? So when you're being hired as the first research hire, you need to understand what is the seniority of the role that is being hired for? Like, are you being hired to support a designer or a PM? Or are you being hired to be the head of research and to be the principal researcher on the team? So, if it is the former, let's say it is a supporting role, right? Then the questions that you must ask during the interview are like, is the person who's gonna lead me, do they understand what research is? What are their expectations out of a researcher? And how can they help me grow in my career? So these are certain awkward, uncomfortable questions which we must, ask during the interview. We must ask it to the person with whom we are gonna work directly with. There is no point, speaking with some other team lead when you're going to be reporting to somebody else. And in the latter case, let's say you're being hired as the first principal researcher or the head of research. In that case, you need to again, have these conversations with the senior management, the founders or CXOs or whoever they are, to get to know like what is their understanding of research, how do they see research fitting, into the company in the org chart, where does it fit, right? Does it report under design, or is it a peer to design, and does it report to the co-founder? And are those co-founders, open to feedback and suggestions? This is a very difficult thing to evaluate in just a few minutes of call, but this is where you must use all your skills as a user researcher and ask the right kind of questions to understand, like will they be open to listening to the suggestions that you have. And those are the things, that kind of context setting, kind of treating it like uh, dating or matrimony thing, like bring out all those baggage and things like that and discuss it. And then, like once you're convinced, yes, I can do my best job here, then you go on and start working in the company. And now, once you start working in the company, first thing is, like do not go about criticizing the team. Nobody likes it. If they knew to do better research, you would be out of a job. To be grateful that they suck at research and don't say it to them. That's the best thing. And spend the first few days just trying to observe what is happening in the company and imbibe everything that is going on. Both the product, the people who are building the product, both are important. Like at the end of the day, the decisions are made by people. So you need to understand those power dynamics or whatever it is that is happening in the company and build the domain. Maybe if you're new to the domain, then you need to first build the domain expertise, then the product expertise, then user expertise. It's all like those Russian nesting dolls, like one after the other it comes. And initially, like I used to, when I joined the company and I was the first user researcher, my first request was, can we run a survey? Can we do a survey? So people never ask, like, can we do research? People ask, can we do a survey? So that's the only thing which they knew. Of course, like they would ask that, but if I get, like if I keep correcting them in every sentence or try to point out, hey, I'm better than you, kind of thing, it wouldn't have worked. So I would just let it play out. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, you want to run a survey? Oh, got it. Cool. Oh, what do you want? What questions do you want? Oh, okay. Why are you asking these questions? And how are you going to use these questions? And then if I feel like, hey, maybe how about we try this also? I'll run the survey, but how about we try this also? Don't say right away reject, like no, I will not run the survey. Just give them this option, and if you do this option, then we will get all this kind of a data, which would be much helpful. Now what do you think we should do? Make sure it feels like they are the ones making the decision, right? If you keep making the decision and you keep thrusting it forward, it will come back and you'll have to do a lot of convincing. But when you make frame it in such a way that it's they are making the decision, and there is no convincing. And in the initial few days, there might have to be certain times where you might have to pick up certain projects, which it is not the best methodology, or like it might not give the best insights, but it is okay sometimes to sort of lower your bar a bit, just to get that earn the trust of the people. Trust is earned one insight at a time, at when you're a user researcher, and people need to trust you. And sometimes we as researchers, we know by doing this nothing is going to happen, but unless they see it in front of their own eyes, they won't believe it. So just go ahead and do what they are saying and show the kind of output you're getting, and then you do it the way you want to do it, and then show the output. That becomes much easier. It's that show don't tell kind of a principle, right? And then like go ahead and first, while it's always exciting for researchers to pick up like a generative research project, because that's like the meaty thing and we love those things. But when it comes to research, do not pick up generative research immediately. Deliver some quick wins. What are those, like low hanging fruits? Something like a heuristic evaluation, or usability testing, or even a survey. What are some of those small wins? Like I said, trust is earned one insight at a time. And when you deliver those little wins one at a time, then people will start trusting. Ah, okay. Otherwise, you start a company and you say, okay, it was nice meeting you all. Now I'm going to take off for 3 months to do this generative research project and then come back after 3 months to meet you all. That's not going to fly because you, first of all, you wouldn't even know in an early stage company what are the questions to ask, who you should talk to, and everything. So you need to build your own domain knowledge as well as influence. So these are some of the things I would say, and how to pick projects, how to work with stakeholders, and then it comes to picking the tools which are most relevant for the company, and systemizing the processes. In the initial phase, you might have to do certain things manually as well. You might not have all the tools or things like that. You might be used to certain tools, but the company is using certain tools. Just give it a fair try and see, and then once you have executed one or two projects, but keep documenting at every project, because only then you yourself will know, like, huh, is this process effective, is this tool effective. Keep documenting at the stage where you feel this can be repeated even if you are removed out of the equation. That means that process is set, that tool is set, and the framework is set. So slowly you can start, like maybe hiring people, or training other people to do certain things and so on. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It answers in a holistic way because you cover the pre-production part of getting hired.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you so much for that. And I could resonate with your story a lot. I love the quote once, earn trust one insight at a time. And when I initially joined my current company, I was expected to do validation research as a support function to design because that is what they wanted. They wanted to
Yeah.
see how the designs are working. And in all my podcasts, I had heard that, don't be the validation monkey, don't just do validation testing. And I kind of feel ashamed in admitting that, okay, my first few projects are about validation only.
Yeah.
However, I did not push through.
Yeah.
In this sense, I did not sit on my boss's head that, okay, I want to do generative research. I let it take its natural course and did a generative study out of the blue without any heads up on my own. And now there is a culture being created where people are actually understanding the value of research not just after product formation, but also
Mm.
before it. That, okay, it can actually give us the right direction on where to work
Mm.
and then how to work in some cases. And then validation, though, now I have like ingrained it in the DNA that we have to validate all the designs. So, the shift from not just validation testing, but to also get ideas out of users that, okay, and
Mm.
that is where generative research comes in, right? So, my
Mm.
portfolio is also budding in that way, such
Mm.
that neither my portfolio is harmed and neither the company's interests are harmed. So, let it take its natural course. And obviously, winning trust is the first thing because people are not familiar with the ways of user research. It's such an intangible thing to explain to someone. I mean, like, you're a designer, you can show your designs, but how do people know that you're a good user researcher?
I
Right?
know. If only thoughts could be made physical, that would be very easy for make our jobs easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it is about evangelizing, earning trust.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing that point up. Validation study shouldn't get so much hate.
Yeah, and no validation study is usually 100% validation. There is a tinge of generative research which sits in that. Either there is a seed of a generative research waiting to be explored in the next thing, or something which adds to a previously done research.
Yeah, and I think when I came in, it was the first time we did a triangulation in the sense first doing qualitative and then quantitative. So,
Mhm.
when you bring in such ideas and people see the impact of it, they actually start trusting you more, as you said. And
Yeah.
you also brought up the point that, first you can try their way and then your way. I'm not sure that if I'll have the time to do both the things. I mean, that is also a factor, right? And
That's there. It's again, like what I say is like, pick your battles wisely. The best way to ensure you have a winning streak is to pick your battles wisely. So, be very creative in, how you do certain things. If maybe they're asking for something, maybe do half of that and, half of what you had in play and find a middle ground kind of a thing.
yeah, and another thing, thank God I learned before any damage was done is not to criticize. Like, I think I
Yes.
had this egoistic sense that you are wrong, you don't know anything, and I'm telling the truth, so I'm not wrong. But it's also the way you say it, and because when you criticize harshly, what happens is that your tone and the harshness becomes the debate rather than the actual thing that is important, that is the product.
100% true. Yep.
Yeah. So I learned it like after 2 months of becoming a researcher, that because initially I also thought that users are my star and product managers, I just need to correct them. Then I understood that product managers are going to give you the bonuses and money, and you are just a medium between the PMs
Yeah.
and the users and be a good one. You have to listen to both the sides.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
So, Sridhar, let's switch gears now. Explore a very different domain, which is very relevant. I feel that I stumbled upon user research, and this is the first field where I don't have much compartmentalization in my head that, okay, I'm a researcher now, and I am a doctor now, and you get the idea, right? When you are a software engineer, you have that coder mindset and then some
Yeah.
other mindset. It is also siloless, and
Mm.
your journey has also been like that, right? You became an engineer and then a designer, a user researcher, and now you're a mental health coach. I
Yeah.
mean, that is testament of the siloless nature of this field.
Yeah.
So you are also a spiritual person, and I'm also a spiritual person. So how has all these aspects help you become a better user researcher? And can you just shed light upon the siloless nature of the field so that people are not tunneled in their vision that
Yeah.
okay, I only have to do this, I only have to do that. They
Yeah.
can explore other territories and apply that here. And
Yeah.
you are, I guess, the best person to talk about that.
Sure, sure. Happy to share my journey. So, like you said, I started out as a developer, I'm an engineering grad, and then, I tried a bunch of different things that engineers do after they graduate. And I ended up in user experience design domain because I found it to be the intersection of technology as well as human behavior. The two things which I enjoyed the most, right? And so even though like that shift was huge, like after working as a developer for 7 years, I had to make a shift, and it was again having to start at the bottom of the career ladder, so as to say. But there were certain things which I had, right, like a practical experience of working in companies and how product development typically works, and like what will happen after the designer does the handoff. I kind of knew that portion, so I could kind of like reverse engineer things, and that became like my USP, so as to say. So I that is the perspective which like I brought to the field. And like even when after I got into UX design, like I was always more energized when I was talking to users, when I was trying to, do that analysis better, trying to bring order to chaos. That's the best way I could describe user research, or making the founders form. So that is, that's the activities which kind of energized me, and which is where, I ended up, specializing as a user researcher, because it kind of aligns with my personality type to do deep work, to be more in contact with people, to be empathetically listening to others, holding space and things like that. And UX research is one domain which has been very open. It has welcomed people from so many different professions. So I have seen a lot of people, who worked as therapists or in the mental health. They have come to user research because, again, the principles of connecting with people and speaking with people remain the same. And in psychology, they do a lot of research. They do quantitative research as well. It's just, the paradigm changes. And I've even seen people come from an architecture background into research, because they are doing some kind of a research, and they're trying to understand something vague and ambiguous and trying to make sense of it all, right? So that way, which research kind of absorbs the different skill sets that people bring to this particular domain, and it allows them to like use it to add value to the customers at the end of the day. And I am one of those exceptions who came into UX research and have now exited to mental health domain, as opposed to people who have done the reverse. And the other thing which you mentioned, right, like siloless, when I hear that word, for me it feels like you bring your different aspects of your personality or your whole self, to this job. See, when you are, say, a developer, you might have so many interests and everything, but at the end of the day, the computer is going to understand only zeros and ones. So you are still bound by that particular thing. A designer would have a much more freedom, right? Like, for instance, they could use their own artistic flair and their own, like uniqueness to the designs that they create. Similarly, for UX research domain, right? You can have like two UX researchers could conduct the same research and come up with completely different insights as well. They could be given the same set of data points, and they could come up with different insights, because we all have a different perspective on things. See, there is like certain bit of bias in everyone, right? So it is like, and I wouldn't call bias in the negative sense here. It is, bias is nothing more than the way in which we look at the world. And sometimes, having people who have a different point of view of looking at the world, it really helps. And for me, like, I've always been interested in understanding how the mind works. This is something I've been doing even before I heard about UX design. I've been reading so many books on psychology, and I read a lot of books on spirituality as well, which talks about the understanding of the mind, the workings of the mind, and it's been detailed in so much depth that it's fascinating. And I've always found, like, this very interesting, and I was naturally drawn to all of this. So for me, when I hear the word siloless, it kind of allowed all these aspects of my personality to come into play when I was a researcher.
I was just reading about this concept called reflexivity in research,
Hmm.
where the researcher is reflecting upon his or her position in the society and what are his or her shortcomings and things like that. And to be a good researcher, you have to first and foremost understand yourself. And I couldn't agree more with this school of thought, because knowing about myself has led to me becoming a better colleague and a
Hmm.
better user researcher.
Yeah.
And it is more important in our field because we have to deal with human beings all the time.
Yeah.
And I like to quote Taleb here again. He says that in this modern world, the distance between the creator and the user is
Hmm.
widening. And that
Hmm.
is where user researchers, the messengers, are becoming more important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to become a good messenger or the good medium, you have to understand all the aspects of human behavior, because you're dealing with a lot of humans,
Yeah.
emotions, thoughts, perspectives. So, getting to know yourself is of utmost importance. It's not optional anymore, I think, especially
Hmm.
with this statement, right? That the gap between the creator and the user is increasing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, right? Like, we talk about removing bias in research. How will you remove something that you do not even understand or know that it exists? And to understand that, then you have to, make the unconscious conscious. So there is the work of, working upon yourself and this introspection and the constant improvement. And the other thing which you said, yes, we are in so much of close contact with people, and being a user researcher is a good thing to, get your ego in shape. People will, you can ask some questions, people will answer, give a different answer. They might be late or they might be in a bad mood. You have to accommodate all of that, and you have to think on your feet to, like make the best use of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I agree with this. Like, I feel that user research has helped me become a better human. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'll always be indebted to the profession for this. That
Yes.
not only you're feeding me, but also helping me evolve. So,
Yes, we are all karma yogis. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. So, had a great discussion with you, Sridhar. This is like a very beautiful note to end on, that talking about ourselves, talking about our biases. And I would also like people to know about your work, what you're doing. So please go ahead, the stage is yours.
Sure. So yeah, so like recently I made a switch to like move out of user research and to become a mental health professional. So work was going good and everything was going good. I enjoyed being a researcher, but there were still certain aspects of it which I was yearning, right? And that is where I liked being able to help people, and I was doing a lot of mentoring within the company and outside the company, and all of those things brought me more joy than the work that I was doing, right? And my entire career graph has been a choice of elimination. I've literally optimized my career by eliminating the things that don't give me joy. So in user research, if I eliminated everything which I do not like, the only thing which stands is like speaking to people and understanding how the mind works. So when it came down to that, the natural choice seemed to be becoming a therapist. And I've had my fair share of challenges to overcome: physical health challenges, mental health challenges, and things like that. And there was a bout of insomnia which I was going through, and during which I was on antidepressants. I was working with a psychologist to understand the cause of it, and it was a very painful journey, and there was a lot going on in my life. So I was trying to like get a handle on things, right? So that's when I tried this technique called rapid transformational therapy, and I found that very phenomenal and liberating. Instead of me having to learn a million models and jargon, it gave me a framework to be able to process my thoughts and emotions in a healthy manner. I know, like as a layman, I could still understand, oh, why am I doing this? Oh, this could be the reason. Okay, let me try something like that. It kind of simplified, therapy and healing for me. So that is when, like I decided, okay, let me just study to be a therapist. I'll just do this on the side, kind of like chicken soup for the soul, and I'll figure something out as time goes by. But by that time I was close to graduating, I knew that this is where I like fit. And to be honest, to a certain extent, I've always known this is where I kind of fit, but I was kind of reluctant to accept it or move into like a mental health space. But then I decided, I'm like 34. If I don't do it now, when else am I going to, live my life for myself, right? And do the choices that I want to do. And thankfully, I also had the privilege and option to take such a huge risk, for the lack of a better word, and, go all in. So that's when, I decided to, part ways with UX research and, head full time in practicing as an RTT therapist and helping people. So that's been my journey of what drew me in towards this domain. And now I typically work with mid-career professionals, and I help them with finding confidence at work and clarity in life.
Yeah, I would like to share one thing here, that as a researcher, sometimes you'll also have to be the therapist.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
I mean, I think I might be using the wrong word, but you have to listen to other aspects of people's stories so that they have trust in you and they can share with you what is actually useful to you, or else it will feel transactional, right?
Yes, that's very much true. We are, as a user researcher, you're a therapist for a product. Here you become a therapist for people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Sridhar. This was a fantastic conversation.
Oh, it was, like wonderful catching up with you again, Svikruti. And thanks for having me over. And I hope my story, inspires many more people to get into UX research. All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.